So, welcome Liz, and thank you to everyone for joining us at this webinar. As I say, if you have any questions, please do type them along there and we'll answer them as we go along. Otherwise, over to you, Liz.
Thanks very much indeed, Candy. Thank you everybody for joining this meeting. I'm an ex-chair of the audit panel for IPEM, and I've also been on the audit panel for what seems quite a while now. I've also chaired the professional development panel recently as well. So I want to try and make this session as interactive and useful as possible. So as Candy says, please do type your questions as we go through, and I can break off the presentation to answer them if it's important at that point in the time. Otherwise, perhaps we'll wait till the end. So I'll try and share my screen now and talk through the PowerPoint slides that I've got. Okay, so I hope everybody can see my screen at the moment now, rather than me. There's a title
not yet,
slide.
Liz, sorry.
Oh, okay. Let's see where I've gone wrong there. Let's try this. Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Is that okay? Right. How's that? Is that okay, Candy?
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so preparing for CPD audit. I'm presuming that you've joined the webinar this afternoon because you've been selected for having your CPD record audited by IPEM this coming May. If not, hopefully it'll be useful information anyway. So what I want to try and do is give you a short, succinct guide in how to produce this effectively and efficiently, making the best use of your time. So here are some of the possible reactions you might have had when you got the request from IPEM. But hopefully this session now will give you a bit more of insight into what is needed and how best to record it. So what information do you need for a CPD record, and what counts as CPD? A few examples from your workplace and how to put down the results that you've got, and then what does the audit actually require? What are the standards? So what do you need for your CPD record? Hopefully you've got some notes from the past year, and the year that's going to be audited this coming May is for the year 2018 from January to December. So chronological order is probably the best way of keeping your record, and your record should have a date and a title for each activity. Now the date can be, if it's, for example, a monthly journal club, it can be just monthly in the date column. Then a category to ensure a range of activity types through the year, and I'll come on to that a bit later. We have 5 categories that we try and fit things into to be most organised. Then the 2 most important sections: a reflection on the benefit that it's been to you to do this particular CPD activity, and a reflection on the benefit to the person or the organisation that you were doing it to or for. And this is commonly put down as the service user. And then for your own benefit, a note of where to find the evidence of this activity. And you can keep a rough tally as to how long it's spent to do this CPD activity. And what is really good is to aim for about an average of 3 or 4 hours a month over the year, with no gaps longer than about 3 months. If you do have any gaps, do give a brief explanation, just saying, for example, that you've had an extended period of absence. And I'll mention a bit more about that later. So if you've done lots and lots and lots of CPD in the year, just ensure that your write-up covers between 3 and 5 types of the activities that we've got. Then you could actually miss out some of your activities out of your summary that you submit for audit. It's not necessary to go overboard and give us huge amounts, but showing us that you've done CPD continuously for 3 to 4 hours a month is enough evidence to submit. If you've been off work for any reason for longer than 3 months in one block of time or a couple of blocks of time, it may be worth contacting the IPEM office and requesting that the audit is deferred to the following year. Give a brief reason, and then the chair of the CPD panel will consider that together with the IPEM staff and give you an answer as to whether your audit can be deferred.
Can I just interrupt you there, Liz? We just have a question from Sheila. Does each activity have to be a benefit to you and the service user, or is it acceptable for it to only be a benefit to one of these?
That's a very good question. If it's a benefit to you, then there will be some benefit to the service user. And sometimes that just means being a little bit creative. For example, does the activity that you've done benefit the organisation just in terms of your broad knowledge, whether or not that knowledge gained is applicable to your role directly or not? You having a wider knowledge generally is often a benefit in a broader sense to your employer, for example, or to the patient, even if it's not directly related to your role. Does that help at all? Do type a quick note back into the chat box. Whilst you do that, I'll continue on here, if I may. What counts as CPD? Continuing professional development is anything that you learn inside or outside work that you can apply to your working role. And it's activities by which you as a professional maintain and develop your knowledge throughout your career. And I'd also add that it improves efficiency, effectiveness, understanding, and it broadens you out as a person and you learn something new. And these type of words, maintain, develop, improve and broaden, are very useful words to use in your reflection as to what you've learned. So you do CPD a lot of the time during your working life, but sometimes it's just routine to you and you just need to recognise that perhaps you are still learning something new and making a note of what it is that you've learned. And in future CPD records, just being proactive in recording your activities as they happen can be done very quickly once you're in practice. And some of the things to ask yourself are you doing something for the first time ever? Was that hard to do, or did it take more effort than you expected? And having done it, is it now quicker to do it second, third, fourth time round? Even if you've been chatting with a colleague over coffee and you think, oh, I didn't know that, I'll go and find out some more about it. Even that can be an opportunity to learn something that applies to your working life. So even that you can put down as a CPD activity. So in order to work out if you're learning something by doing a task, ask yourself, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Could it be done any differently or any better? And what next? And that's reflection. And it's a really key skill to be able to cultivate, is to ask yourself those questions as you're doing something. Now, development, is very personal. So you have to be honest with yourself, and you and a colleague can both be doing the same task, and each of you will learn something different from doing it. In fact, you may not learn anything new from the task, But just thinking about it and whether you have learned something or not can be a learning activity in itself. And then reflection actually becomes a habit as you practice. So let's look at a couple of examples. The first one, doing a routine task in your working day that you do day in and day out. And then one day you actually look at a written procedure for the task that you're doing and find that the procedure is a bit different to what you've actually been doing. So ask yourself, how is it different? Is it me that's doing it differently, or is the procedure correct and up to date? So either way, you might need to change something, either the procedure itself or the way that you do the task. And by asking yourself these questions, you're reflecting on what you're doing. So let's take this example and continue it a bit further to a write-up. Does reflecting on this task lead to a change, either in the procedure or in your practice? It would still be a work-based example, this. It could be an entry in your CPD record showing how you or your procedure has changed by you thinking about this. And even if there are no changes, it could still be an entry in your CPD record to demonstrate that you're up to date with working to the current procedures in your department. How do you yourself benefit from identifying the change? And how have you learned to do the procedure, perhaps the issued way? Are you up to date now? And how has the organisation benefited? So this is the benefit to the service user now that perhaps a change has happened. And the sorts of things that we're looking for as auditors are that you're now more efficient at doing the procedure in the issued way. That everybody in the department can now follow the updated procedure in the same way. And by doing that, there's more efficiency, more standardisation. So those are the sorts of comments that we would expect to see in the benefit to the service user. So writing up this example, there's an RCT form here, and I'll just zoom in on this in the next slide. So the activity title might be the procedure to do whatever it is. The date that you perhaps first looked at this. This could also be a range of dates, for example, just the month in which you did this. The type of activity, there are 5 different boxes there, and for this one I've ticked the work-based learning. So reflection on this one. I compared the written procedure with my own practice, and it's shown me the procedure was out of date as it referred to the previous model of the equipment. I brought this to attention of the author of the procedure was updated, and all the team were informed. So the evidence in this case would be the updated and issued procedure, which you could keep a copy of electronically in your CPD folder. And the service has benefited by this because I was able to demonstrate that I was up to date in my practice and learned how a new procedure was issued. And reviewing the procedure also taught me more about the documentation system that we use, so I can use it more effectively in the future. And the service benefited by me having an up-to-date procedure to allow timely and efficient working to the same standard across the whole department. So this is the sort of amount of information that we would be looking for in your CPD summary record. And the way that this could be written up in summary form is like this. It's the same information as was in the previous table, but just written up in a sort of one line of a spreadsheet, or you can also put this onto IPEM's My Career Path in this sort of format. So another work-based example here. Let's say that you're working in an equipment service here, and a piece of equipment comes in for repair. It's logged in, it's repaired and tested, it's logged out and returned to use wherever it's needed. So just thinking about this process, how does the process work and what gets recorded when a piece of equipment comes in? Could it be done any better or more efficiently? And how would you or your manager know how many pieces of equipment you've repaired compared with last year? And if there's been some changes in models of the equipment, do they take more or less time to repair? And are there any other trends that you could have a look at? For example, one piece of equipment perhaps fails more than another. And this might then be some useful information for your line manager in suggesting to the hospital trust, for example, that they don't use one piece of equipment, but do use another. So ask yourself these questions, and what answers have you come back with, and what changes need to happen? How will those changes happen, and who needs to know? And how will this change benefit you and the organisation or the patient? So there's rather a lot of information on this slide, so I'm going to just zoom in on it slightly more on the next slide. So I reviewed the process we have in place and found that the database wasn't completely up to date. I asked my colleagues at our team meeting and found that everyone found it too complicated to use. We also weren't getting any records out of it that could demonstrate how our workload has changed. So together with a colleague, we made some small changes to the database, so equipment logging in and out was easier, and we ran a short training session for the team to bring everyone up to speed. We then attended a morning's course on extraction of data from databases so we could gather useful data to show management the trends in activity. So your evidence in this case might be a snapshot of the equipment repair database after a month, which is now completely up to date since you've made these changes. It might be your certificate of attendance at a database course, or perhaps a PDF of trend analysis for the main types of equipment fixed over the year. So the service, down at the bottom of that page, the service has benefited by having a complete record of equipment repair, which is user-friendly and allows equipment to be taken in, repaired and returned to the users more efficiently. Data extraction from the database has allowed trend analysis to be done to show which equipment fails most often and predict when it needs replacing. Now, this would be sort of all your reflection about what you've done, but this would be perhaps a little too much to put into your CPD summary sheet. So what would go in the summary sheet based as the type of activity, and then just a very brief summary of what you have found to be a benefit to yourself and the benefits to the service. So you can be a little more succinct. And this summary sheet is what would be returned to the auditors at the audit in May. So I've mentioned already that there are 5 categories of CPD activity that we recommend that you use when recording your activities. These 5 categories are used not only by IPEM, but also the RCT and the Science and Engineering Councils, as well as HCPC. So we've got these 5 types, and I'll go into each one of them now. So your CPD record is more than likely to be mostly work-based learning, and it's professional development of you personally that takes place by fulfilling your current job role. And it does naturally take place as you gain experience and given greater responsibility, or you do more complex tasks with a greater scope. So on this slide, which I'm sure you'll be able to review afterwards, the IPEM staff will make this available to you. Some examples here. Are you in a new role in your working life? Are you learning new skills to meet your job description? Are you having to update your knowledge to stay current? And I think the answer to this for all of us would be yes. Are you doing any mentoring or coaching of other people in your department, including training them in any way? Communication communication is a really useful one to put down in your CPD record. How do you know you're communicating effectively? Can you do routine tasks more efficiently than you were able to previously? And one of the ones that I quite like from time to time to see in a CPD record is the second to bottom one, analysing significant events. For example, if you've had a power cut or worst case, a fire in your department, how did it affect the department? What happened? What could happen differently if there was such a disaster again in the future? So you could use this as an example to update your major incident policy for your department, for example. And that's something that you can do just by looking around and seeing what's happening. The second category of activity is professional. So if you participate in activities of a professional body, whether that's the RCT or IPEM or Engineering Council or the Institute of Physics or anything like that, you are participating in the activities and you can put that down as professional activity. The other category is developing the professional skills and knowledge of other professionals. So working, for example, of myself as a physicist, working with doctors or radiographers in radiotherapy might be developing their personal and professional skills and therefore be a professional activity. Or it might be that you're participating in an activity that applies a scientific expertise in the wider community, for example, at careers events or events to inform the general public more about what you do. So if you've learned something in doing those sorts of activities, then put those down as professional activity. And here's just some examples there. Lecturing or teaching being a useful one to put down, coaching or mentoring other colleagues as well. The third category is formal or educational. So this is really activities that lead to gaining an academic or professional qualification if you're in a structured training course that has those qualifications. If you attend either in person or remotely at structured learning organised by a professional body, that can be in this category as well. And if you prepare papers or articles or presentations for a professional audience, that can also go into this category. So here's a few more examples there. And I'll leave those with you as a thought. One of the useful ones there is in the middle, distance learning or e-learning. So attending webinars remotely is quite a useful way of attending these formal or educational events and could go into this category. Now, the fourth category is self-directed learning. And this is where you as the individual take the initiative to diagnose your learning needs. That sounds very serious, doesn't it? But formulating your goals and designing how you're going to learn, identifying what resources you're going to need to do that, and evaluating what you have learned. So let's just put that into a bit more useful language. If you read books or journals or articles in order to learn something, and then you report back the information that you've read. Or if you actually do internet searches or use electronic information sources to actually update your personal information, that can be self-directed as well. And just reflecting on what you're doing and assessing your CPD activities, both for yourself and for your employer, and identifying the next steps can also be self-directed learning. Other examples where you can't fit your activities into any of the other four categories can come under this one. So there may be activities outside work which don't require scientific expertise, but which help you gain some skills that you can put into practice in your work. And some examples here might be such things as leadership skills in voluntary capacities, perhaps outside of your work, where you have to manage people, and it's much more difficult managing volunteers than it is paid employees. If you've got organizational or planning skills that are needed, or financial skills perhaps, maybe you can bring those into play in your workplace. Or if you coach or counsel outside work, then those can certainly be useful inside your working environment. Even just attending an evening class of something can just show that you've got a commitment to learning, and that can go down as an other activity. And one example that I quite like, just bringing to people's attention, is even chatting with your friends in the pub can be an opportunity to hone your communication skills, perhaps more and more as the quantity of alcohol consumed goes up. But it may actually be able to translate into how to talk with people in a different way inside work. So let's just look at an example.
Sorry, we have another question.
Yeah.
What if an activity could be in multiple categories, e.g. a work-based problem that involves reading a journal for additional info? Is this work-based activity or self-directed learning? My answer to that would be it could be either, but have a look at your overall CPD record, and the way that you write it up will determine which category you put it into. And if, for example, you feel in your CPD record that you haven't got many examples of self-directed learning, then I would tend to put that down as a self-directed learning example, and then leave the work-based learning to other things that you've got. So it's really up to you to decide which category you want to put it in, just really by the way that you write it up. Whether you write it more in the I did this, I read this article in order to learn more about whatever it was, and this has benefited my employer because now I'm well aware of the current status of the procedures nationally, for example. So writing it up as I, we could put it into the self-directed learning example. Whereas if you put it down as did an internet search in order to make a process more efficient at work, then it could go down as a work-based learning example. So just have a look at your entire CPD record and decide whether you need to put a few more items in one particular category rather than the others. Category is represented in your CPD record. I hope that helps a little bit. Thanks, Liz. And Carl's just asking, can you use the same example more than once?
You can, but the auditors will spot it, and will probably... Okay, I'll just repeat what I've said. You can use your example more than once, but it would be frowned upon, really, unless you can write it in a way that brings out different aspects very clearly. And I'm trying to think what an example might be. I think possibly you could write something up, for example, if you'd been involved with your professional body in, let's say, a committee, a diagnostic radiology committee, for example, at IPEM, and you attended the committee meetings and you learned more about the national picture for something. Then you took that back to your workplace and it gave you the impetus to redesign your practice at work. So then you could write up the same thing in two different ways because it was two different activities, if you like. But so if you're going to repeat something in your CPD record, do make sure that you've got different aspects covered for the same example, if you like. So different aspects of the task or the area of work that you cover by each example, rather than just writing up the same thing twice. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, so let's have a look at an example from your personal development plan that I hope you all get on an approximately at least annual basis. So in your professional development plan, there's an objective which says, become proficient in using this piece of new equipment by September 2018 by following department procedures to a standard which passes internal assessment for competency. So the outcome is that you are signed off as competent to use this new piece of equipment. So that's your personal development plan objective. But in order to translate that into CPD, you might need to do a number of things. For that piece of equipment, you might need to read the instruction manuals, and that you could put down as self-directed learning. You might want to go on a training course or complete an e-learning module, and that could be put down as a formal or educational item. If you shadowed colleagues or talked with users of this piece of equipment in another department, you could write it up as work-based. And using the equipment under supervision and being assessed could go down as a work-based learning outcome. But there might be some other directions your CPD plan could take. It might be that you updated or modified the standard operating procedures, which would be work-based, to give the benefit to the department of having an up-to-date procedure. Another work-based outcome would be to develop a new use of the equipment. And writing up the development or the use of it and presenting it to your colleagues could be a formal or educational CPD opportunity. And teaching or supervising others in the use of the equipment could be work-based. And the benefit being to your service user or other colleagues is that they are then competent and you get a more efficient patient throughput. So you can keep records of your CPD activities or notes throughout the year in a variety of places, and which one is used is really up to you, but here's a few ideas. Just the bullet point at the bottom, do please ensure that any information that you submit to the CPD audit, that's anonymous. So do remove names of staff or patients. The only time when we would accept it is if it's in a published article where anybody can see names of people. Otherwise, it should be anonymous. So these items, these places where your CPD records can also be places where you store the evidence of your CPD as well. So structure your learning if at all possible, and looking forward to next year, if you haven't done this already, create a spreadsheet or use My Career Path to actually record your activities and update it regularly. And carry out what should be a fairly simple plan of action, and just reflect on what you've learned. And there is articles on reflection on the internet generally and in the CPD area of the IPEM website. So planning it in advance, your CPD isn't just related to your job and what the employer wants you to do, but it can be broader than that and include your career and life goals as well. So if you're looking, for example, at your job description, here are some questions to ask yourself. Can you already do everything that's in your job description, or are there some things that you need to learn still? And the bottom bullet point there, how will you work towards the next level up or progress in your chosen career direction? And now often in your job description itself, there'll be some useful phrases. Some of them might be shown here on this slide, which you can actually use to put into your benefits write-up. These are very useful phrases to actually demonstrate benefit to yourself and to your employer. So just ask yourself, when you're doing something that you might want to put down as your CPD activity record, has doing that activity met your development objectives? Do you know now how to do something that you didn't know before? So what have you gained from doing the activity, and what will you do differently as a result of learning it? And how will it help you? And what benefits will it have? And does it help you to prepare for perhaps a new role, a career move, for example? So let's just take a brief look for the last few minutes at the actual audit standards with some hints and tips as to what we're looking for on the audit panel. So the first standard is that the registrant must maintain a continuous, up-to-date and accurate record of their CPD activities. So do spread your activity out over the year and don't have unexplained gaps. So just put in an explanation of why there's been a gap, or try and find something of a perhaps more routine nature, maybe journal reading or something like that to fill in any gaps. Do make sure that the record that you submit for audit is for the correct year. And for this May, it is the year 2018's activities. But as auditors, we don't meet you in person or make you take a lie detector test. So we have to take the registrant's word for it that the entries on the CPD summary are accurate, and therefore we rely on your honesty. The second standard are that you as the registrant must demonstrate that your CPD activities are a mixture of learning activities relevant to the current or future practice. So, as I've already mentioned, write up your CPD activities in at least 3 of the 5 categories, and often that can just mean being a bit creative in how it's written up. Do keep a wider focus. CPD isn't just courses or meetings that you've attended, as I hope I've shown you already. So you can be doing all sorts of things just in your routine workplace, and it can still be learning something. And think about everything that you're doing, both inside and outside work, to assess whether your learning is applicable to the work environment. For example, an example in my own case, talking with my teenage daughter and having to keep things to bite-sized chunks, perhaps, in order to keep her concentration and focus is something that I've learned a lot about, and I'm able to apply that into the working environment where we have pressured situations that require quick responses. The third standard, a registrant must seek to ensure that their CPD has contributed to the quality of their own practice and service delivery. So this is the benefit to you. So do be clear about how the activity has benefited you and the way you do your work. And one of the ways of doing this is to think about how to justify perhaps to your line manager or the boss why you needed to do that activity in the first place. And you can pick up some keywords, for example, from your job description. But the other benefit column to fill in is the benefits to the service user. So how has you doing that CPD activity benefited either your employer or the patient, perhaps your colleagues, or the service your department provides, or even a member of the general public that you're telling about your job? And to the service that is provided, it might lead to improvements in accuracy or efficiency, patient care or safety. And there's a number of other categories that you can put in there. But just think about what the employer is having to, what sort of standards or outcomes the employer is wanting, and how can you doing those activities contribute to those outcomes. And the last one, upon request, present a written profile which must be your own work and supported by evidence explaining how you've met the standards for CPD. And as long as you've submitted a CPD summary for the audit when you're requested to do so, then you've met this standard. You don't have to submit evidence to the CPD audit panel, but keep a note of what evidence there is so that the audit panel are convinced that you really have done that activity. So the last couple of slides, just a couple of common FAQs really. We get asked quite a lot, can you put mandatory training on your CPD record? So for example, going to fire training or conflict resolution training within the trust, etc. Yes, you can, as long as you can be convincing about what you've learned on that occasion. Because attending yet another annual fire lecture might not have taught you anything, but if it's reminded you of, where are the fire extinguishers? Is there anything different, new in your department that you have to know about? Then you could put the new things down. And another question we're typically asked is how much CPD is enough? And so we recommend that you ideally record about 3 to 4 hours a month. So having attended this webinar now, that gives you at least 1 hour in March, either in one item or split into several. An example, if you go to a monthly journal club, and if you've got plenty of CPD material, you could actually enter your journal club learning as a monthly item and then just write up your benefits to yourself and the employer as a more generic thing rather than as relating to the particular example that you have on a 1 month basis.
We have a question from Avril, Liz.
Yep.
For a long-term project, including journal articles or something that goes through several plan, do, study, act cycles, what would you put in the date and hours columns? This could last several months and take a huge number of hours.
Yes, I think what I would say in terms of the date, you could put that it lasted from January to April. And that the number of hours that you spent on it was something like 50 or 60. So that just shows that it was a large piece of work, that it took a lot of time and effort. But in that case, what I would tend to do would be to try and split it down a little bit if you've not got too much material for your record. Split it down into 2 or 3 different things that you've learned. Perhaps was it how to bring a new procedure into use? Was it how to train colleagues? Was it actually doing the training of the colleagues to carry out that procedure? Or if you're writing articles, did you learn something about writing concisely? Or did you perhaps learn something new about the process that you have to go through in order to get articles edited, corrected, resubmitted on time, or did it teach you something about your time management skills? So there are a number of different ways that you could write it up, but do be honest about the amount of time that it's taken you. There's nothing wrong with that. It just shows the auditors that you were very busy on that particular thing. Okay. So just this last point here, be creative in how you write up an activity. Be honest, but be creative. So, even reading up about something is self-directed learning, for example, or mentoring somebody could be professional activity. So I hope being called up for audit hasn't hit you too hard, and that you can actually relax, because you are certainly doing a range of CPD in your working environment, and you're already doing more than enough to demonstrate that you're keeping up to date. It's just a matter of recording it in a way that shows that. So, and you could even, if you wish to, now that you've been through the audit, or you will be going through the audit process, you could put your learning about recording your CPD and undergoing an audit to good use, and you could volunteer even to join the IPEM's audit panel, because we're always looking for new auditors. So that could be one way that you could learn even more. So some acknowledgements, IPEM and all of the CPD material that is available through IPEM, including My Career Path. And if you'd like to know more about that, I think we have Joe from IPEM with us on this webinar. The RCT and the HCPC Science Council and the Engineering Council, in fact, and members of the audit panel. And there's some references there which you can look up if you would like to, and we can make this presentation available to you after this webinar. So thank you very much for listening, and if you've got any further questions, I would be very pleased to have them. Thank you very much.
We do have a couple of questions already.
Yeah.
So one is around a maternity leave. Was on maternity leave until mid-April and am concerned that unable to provide evidence of continuous CPD activity. Will this be taken into account during the audit process?
Thank you. That's a good question. If your maternity leave was up to this April, then you might have been at work for most of 2018, which is the CPD audit period. However, if it was last year and you were off for 4 months, 6 months or whatever, then I think the best thing to do is to, before you submit a CPD record, is to contact the IPEM office and ask for a deferment. If you have done CPD activity during your maternity leave, if you've had chance by any stretch of the imagination, then you could still submit a record, and that's really up to you. But you could equally ask for a deferment, and it will probably be granted.
Rachel does actually say she has tried that and they won't defer. Okay.
Then I would suggest that you submit the CPD audit summary, that you make it clear when you were on maternity leave, and that you fill in what you can of CPD activity for the time that you were working, and then they can come back to you with comments should they wish to following the audit.
Thank you. We have another one here just saying, can you expand on what do we need to submit for audit? Is it just the summary sheet, or is it the summary and full activity document?
It's the summary sheet that we're looking for. So the it sort of can be like an expanded Excel spreadsheet, really, with 1 line per activity, and it's a summary of the activities that are asked for. If you're using My Career Path, then you actually create a report of whatever you've put into the benefits boxes on My Career Path on the IPEM website, in which case what the auditors see will be whatever you've written in there. So my recommendation would be that you write a summary form in there, so that when the report is created, it's just a summary that's submitted. That's all we need.
Carl just says he uses the old paper IPEM forms.
Yeah, there are 2 paper IPEM forms. One is a sort of half sheet or full sheet for each activity, and that's where you can write more details. And then there's also a summary sheet on the IPEM forms. I think it's a form C, the letter C for Charlie 2. And that is really sort of 1 line per activity. And it's that summary sheet that is required for audit. Okay.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? We have one here. Do we stop when we have shown sufficient evidence of continuous CPD, or do we submit all CPD activities, which could be a lot?
Yes, the auditors have a lot of audits to get through on the audit day. So the audit returns that have got 12 or 14 pages of activities, it takes quite a lot of going through those. So what I would recommend is that make sure that the CPD summary that you return has got activities spread throughout the year. But once you've shown us that you've done, let's say, 3 to 4 hours of activity per month, then you don't need to show us all the rest of the activity that you've done. You could just mention at the end of your summary something like, in addition to what is down here, I have done a further 150 hours in the year of CPD activity, but you don't need to list everything, no.
Great, thank you. I think, unless there are any more other questions, I think that is about it, Liz.
Okay, well, I'll send this presentation through to you, Candy, and then if you would like to share it with those that have been on the webinar, that would be magnificent.
Of course, yes, we'll get that sorted.
Okay.
Lovely, well, thank you very much for your time, Liz.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening. I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you.
Okay.